Okay, we're back to our old reliable StreamYard today. And for those who don't know who I am, my name is Steve Tracy. I'm the VP of Technical Services here at JL Audio. I'm joined as always by my buddy Matt. Say hi, Matt.
Hi, everybody.
And of course, the producer extraordinaire, I believe is what he's referred to as, Mr. Rob Haynes, coming all the way from Southern California. Please say hello, Rob.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
Excellent. Well, we do apologize for some of the technical issues last week. We are not going to experience any this week. So we are working towards a better streaming service, and that'll happen over the next couple of weeks, hopefully, without the issues going forward. So we have a really cool session for you today, taking our step out of the car for a little bit, and we're going to focus in on some home audio uses for Tune software. This week, we're going to be focusing on using a single USB-based microphone to take measurements to do subwoofer integration into a room, as you'll see in a moment. And then next week, we're going to take it up a notch, so to speak, and we'll use Max to do similar measurements and do a couple of additional things and kind of give you some background on that. So we do have a keynote that we're going to jump into and kind of talk a little bit about the layout of what we're going to do and what the plan is. But we'll come out of that pretty quickly, and we'll get right to the actual physical stuff. And all right.
Let's get to it.
Let's do it. Okay, so home subwoofer integration with a single microphone. And we often say USB microphone. The truth is it could be a sound card with an XLR microphone, but USB is a much easier way of doing things. So USB microphone is what we're really talking about. Actually, come down over here. Sorry. Technical issue. I'm kidding. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about measuring a room to find the optimal subwoofer location. And there's a lot of variables that go into that. We'll kind of unfold that as we go. We're going to talk about the difference between moving a subwoofer versus moving a microphone to take those measurements. And I'll let you think about which one I think is going to be the recommended way. We're going to talk about how to connect an input device like your microphone to your computer, as well as determine where the sound from the signal generator is going to go out on your computer, so you can see how we do all of that. Then we're going to talk about comparing, analyzing, and capturing all the measurements so that we can actually do a good job of figuring out what's going to be our optimal location. We're also going to talk about aligning phase. Now, those that have been paying attention to some of other trainings that we have done, we don't have the ability to actually measure phase. So we're going to focus in on the interactions between the subs and the main speakers, which is in effect aligning the phase response. But without the visibility, it will take a little bit longer, and it won't be quite as accurate as if we had Max or some other way of measuring time. But we're going to show you how to use basic tools to do a really good job of doing that. We're also going to talk a little bit about using one of our signal processors for home audio called the Cr1, and we're also talking about using a preamp integration solution as well. So Matt will kind of get into a little bit of that. And then the last and probably the most important part, we always do one, but we seldom do the other. We're going to talk about listening to the system and recapturing the data, doing a final capture of that end result. That's the part we rarely do. We love listening, but we always forget to put the mics back. So we'll see how that all goes. All right, so optimal location. What we're talking about here is that every single room that you're going to deal with is going to impact your speakers in some way. And when we talk about subwoofer response, it's going to create peaks and valleys in the measured response compared to your reference. So we want to measure those things and figure out what location is going to minimize the valleys and the peaks as much as possible so that we get really good performance. We also have to be smart about this, that not every single location in a room is going to be a viable one. I often kid around when we talk about what's the best place for the subwoofer. Well, it might be in the dead center of the room. It just doesn't look very good there. So when we actually go through and move the subwoofer or microphone into different locations, we're going to choose locations that make sense. As you see on the screen, an ideal location should be as smooth as possible, usually. And what I mean by usually is sometimes the best location is not the most desired location. It's desirable, otherwise we wouldn't have measured it, but it may not be the most desirable. If the number 2 choice is far more desirable, even if it has more peaks or valleys, you may want to consider that. So when we talk about optimal, we're talking about the best compromise of all factors, including the spousal approval factor, or the SAF, as well as the measured responses, as we'll see.
Now, I still haven't been able to convince my wife that my D110 is ideal in the dead center of our living room. Yeah, I don't get it.
Put a little plant on it and say, see how lucky that is, right? So the next bullet point, I think very often as a company that makes subwoofers, we get a lot of heat for this one. When we say multiple subwoofers could really help, they're like, oh yeah, it helps you guys. It's like, but you're missing the point. If you do a really good job of integrating your subwoofer, you're not getting more subwoofers to get more level. because it's already well integrated. What you're doing is you're trying to smoothen out the room response. Having multiple locations can really make the room response more even and less peaks and valleys, which is, as we already shared with you, is the goal of all of this, is to make a nice even room response. And if you do use multiple subwoofers, not only will it help with that, but you can actually turn the level down on each one of the subs, which will give you more dynamic capability in the long run. The level should not change. It should have already been right in the first place. What we're doing is actually pulling back on level on each sub without compromising performance. It only just gets smoother and better overall. So yes, of course, it helps JL Audio and other subwoofer companies because we sell more product, but ultimately the performance is what we're recommending. So instead of, 2 Gothams, maybe you just only do 2 Fathoms, right? That's sort of a joke.
I think you're right about the subwoofers not being very pointy, though. They're normally pretty round.
This is true. It's a good point. Anyway, moving on, the bad thing. So when we talk about measuring room response, very often we're faced with what's called the crawl test. And does anyone really do the crawl test? I don't know that actually people do this test, but the concept is that you play a subwoofer in the listening location and you crawl around the room on your hands and knees listening to music to see where it sounds the best. That seems a bit archaic, but this is a method that technically does work. It's just not the most sophisticated. You might decide to use an SPL measurement, which I think is a better thing, but very often we were doing this with music, something with a lot of bass in it to try to find the peaks and the valleys of that average SPL measurement. Not a terrible idea, but again, I think there's better ways. And one way would be using test tones. It's something repeatable. You know the tone, and it's easier to measure that. But using a single tone, you may hit it at a peak or at a valley or somewhere in between. And if you don't use other tones, you don't have visibility to that. So you might say, well, we'll just use multiple tones. But it's the law of the gaps. As you add more tones, you have more gaps in between those tones. But we could use an RTA. An RTA will have a line that'll actually fill in those gaps and actually give a good representation of what the response will actually look at. So what we're going to focus on today is taking RTA measurements. The tools that we're going to use is Tune 4, which is free. It's free. Right. Tune 4, which is free, and we're going to use a single microphone. You can use almost any microphone that you might want to look at. Dayton makes a good one. We're using an Audio Frog microphone today, but what's that other one? The Mini DSP makes a microphone, which is a really good one as well. All said and done, these microphones are fairly inexpensive. In the US, maybe $100, $150, and you could use it for so many different things. It's a worthwhile investment. So again, Tune is free. So your investment is in that USB microphone and a little bit of time and some cables. That's about it. And we're going to have the ability to see both an RTA response and a spectrograph response using Tune software. And I'm not sure if we're going to get into spectrograph today, mostly because we have a lot of noise back here, which might look weird. What I like about Tune software, it has the ability to capture and save the traces so that we can call them back up and look at them later if we want to. So we're going to do a little bit of that today. Also, Tune comes with the signal and target generator. So all of this is built into the software. So we're going to show how to use some of those tools as well. Moving along. There are 2 ways to find out a room response. One way is to move the subwoofer. What we do here is we put the microphone where the listener would sit, in roughly head position, and you take a subwoofer and you move it around the room and you look at the response and see how it changes. Now, this is a valid thing because you put the sub in the locations where you think you might put it later, and you look at the response and you can go from there. The problem is, today we'll be using a D110 for our measurements. And a D110, not an insignificant subwoofer, but it's something you could manage and move around. If you were dealing with like a Fathom, like a single 12 or a single 13 or the dual 12 or a Gotham, you are not moving that thing around very easily. That would be interesting.
Did you bring my back brace today?
No, I didn't. So
we already have a comment that from one of our Fathom owners that he is not moving his Fathoms.
I'm right there with you, 100%. So what we would rather do in those cases is place the subwoofer or a subwoofer in the listening location and then move the microphone around to various locations, which is what we're going to do today. Now, the point here is whoever made the comment about the Fathom that you don't want to move it around, you probably also don't want to put it on your chair. So if you have an opportunity to grab pretty much any subwoofer that can play a decent amount of, I'll not be moving my Fathoms. I'm with you, Matthew. Anyway, so you could grab any subwoofer that has some kind of capability down low. So if you're a retailer, you can have access to like a D110 or a D108 and situate that in a listening location and then move your microphone around the room. It's a reciprocal relationship. So whatever happens at one point will happen in the other. So moving a much easier to navigate microphone is definitely going to be a smarter way of going. If you're so inclined and have access to the max measurement system, a conversation for a later date, but you technically have the opportunity to position 5 microphones at the same time. So you could literally do 5 concurrent measurements, and instead of capturing and saving, you should do that anyway. You could literally turn off each one of the microphones in those various locations to see which one's the best. So it gives you an idea of what we're going to do today. We are going to use the I'm moving a microphone, not the subwoofer technique. He's going to be doing all of it, so I think this really comes from his book more than mine. So next up we have, hang on, how come this is not changing?
Hold on one second right here. Go ahead.
Technical difficulties. See?
Nope.
You see that little cursor? That can drive Rob nuts. Okay. So when it comes time to taking measurements, in general, what we're going to do is we're going to determine a reference. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to put the microphone very close to the subwoofer we'll be measuring. So that's the subwoofer. It's not anechoic and it's not a perfect reference, but by minimizing the room effect by measuring very close to the speaker, we can get an idea what the sub is capable of. Good thing about this is you can see that the sub is going to be rather capable, and any changes in the low end response is not because the sub's not good, it's because the room is changing it. So we're going to have this as our reference, and then we'll compare it to the new measurements. And there's an important point here that we need to capture as well, and that's what we're calling the broadband energy level, or as Matt likes to call it, the BEL, because he likes acronyms. The broadband energy level is just the average amount of energy that you'll see on an SPL meter while playing pink noise. And we'll use this to normalize our responses so we can see level differences as well as deviations in frequency response. So then we're going to measure the different locations that we're considering. And I think we have 5 picked out today.
5 locations.
So we've got 5 locations. We're going to capture and label each one of those. We'll make a note of the broadband energy level, and then we'll normalize all those to the reference curve. And then we'll compare them and figure out which one is the most desirable. And if you're using a system that has a DARO, or dynamic
Digital automatic room optimization.
Thank you. It's a new tongue. So if you have a room optimization routine, what this routine will do is it uses a multi-band parametric equalizer to remove boosts or peaks in the response and normalize it to that point. So if you're looking at a response and you have DARO or DARO, if you have DARO and you're looking at a room response, focus on the valleys, not so much the peaks, because the system will pull those peaks down. So if you have to make a choice, error on one that has more of the peaks than valleys if you have to, because we can normalize that through equalization a lot easier. And then when it comes to aligning the subs and main, this is what we were talking about. We don't have the ability to measure phase per se, but we can align these two together to make sure that they're working well in time. And we do this by looking at the combined response of both the subwoofer and the main speakers combined, and we'll see how well they sum together. And we have a couple of things that we'll do with that as well. So since our controls are limited when it comes to this phase comparison, we'll be using a tool like polarity. There's a polarity switch on a subwoofer. And we know that this is not phase, but it allows us to flip things and see changes in a dramatic sense, which can really help in the process that we're going to show you, which is we may look for a null rather than a peak. And we do have a phase control on the subwoofer, and many subwoofers will have that as well, where you can actually dial in the phase to see if you can improve the response or the summation in that regard. And we're going to stop here. We're going to pull out of the keynote and let Matt start moving some subwoofers. We will talk about subwoofer integration with a 2-channel system, both with and without a Cr1. And we'll also mention how to do this with an AV receiver, both with and without a Cr1. But I'm going to jump out of the keynote, Rob, if I may.
Yep. Let's,
let me come in here.
We even have a cool view of the room, so
Look
we can
that.
watch
Isn't that
Matt
something
move
special
around
there?
the subwoofers and microphones and all that good stuff.
All right, so let me pull up Tune. Okay, so we have Tune loaded up on our computer here. And I think, Rob, you have that. Do we need that yet?
Yep, we need Tune now.
There we go. So there's Tune. On the bottom screen here, this is the RTA response, and you can see that we have some targets on there. We're going to load up.
We can just hide them for now. We'll come back to load the targets until later.
All right, so hide those targets.
Yep.
Oops. All right, so up here, you'll notice that we have meters and gains. So we've launched the software, and we have a mic connected, but we have not configured it to work with the software yet. So if we go to the upper left-hand corner to open the measure settings, we click up there. We see the general tab, and we see that we can select an input from. This is our microphone. So if we click the drop down arrow, we'll see that there's several options. The one that we're going to choose is the USB audio device, which is our microphone. So we'll select that. And as soon as we do, you'll see in the background here that the USB audio device is receiving signal. And you can see it is responsive to our sound as well. We're also going to determine what signal generator output is going to be. So if we click down here, this particular audio device has an output as well as an input. So we're going to select that as well. So now our signal generator feature that's in the software is going to send signal out that same thing. There's a separate port that we're playing our audio system with. Down here, you'll see there's something called the Traces folder location. When we're capturing this data, we have the ability to store it on the computer in a specific location. And we've already set this up to be in the home subwoofer integration with single mic folder. You can actually change that by clicking choose and identifying a new folder in here. So we do a bunch of different testing. So home subwoofer integration with single mic. So that's been defined. So now we can close out of this. And now our mic is connected, and we can test this by hitting the play button on our signal generator up here in the upper right-hand corner. And we are playing pink periodic noise. And if we click play, the sub would just leave, but there we go.
And normally you'd want to lower the level of the signal generator as well before you start playing the signal. If you have a Gotham and you start it pretty high, you might have some issues. So it's always good to turn it down a little bit before you.
Your neighbors might have some issues.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are now getting data from our microphone. We have our signal generator functioning and playing signal through the system. But on the lower graph here, our RTA, we need to select our input from that microphone, the USB audio device, right? So now, if we talk, we'll start seeing some of those responses show up on the screen, and now we're ready to start taking some measurements, right?
That's right.
So what are we going to do next, Matt?
All right, so now what we're going to do, I'm going to go physically move the subwoofer into the listening position. And then we're going to get the microphone pretty close to the subwoofer and about within 12 inches or so.
Okay.
And we're going to capture that trace, and that'll be our reference trace to compare everything else to.
Excellent. So have at it. You'll see Matt working in the room on our room view camera. So there's a little Dominion 110, and you can see Matt can lift it. And as he demonstrated, you should always lift with your back in a twisting, wrenching motion. Always lift with your legs, people, please. Safety first, right? So you see he put it in a location where the listener would sit. You may notice that he put the subwoofer so it's actually pointing up to try to get it closer to where the listener's ears might be, just as an approximation. He's got a table there that's got the mic stand, and he's going to position the microphone as close to the subwoofer as he reasonably can. And when he gives me the thumbs up, fortunately, we're going to play low frequency energy, so it shouldn't affect my microphone too much. If we hit play, you'll see that my graph is a little off the screen here. So on this lower graph here, you can see that we have subwoofer response. And I'm going to go ahead and hit capture, and I'm going to put this as reference.
And to capture, you can either press the space bar, or in the bottom right corner, if I remove our little technical overview banner, there's a little camera icon you can see right to the right of the RTA screen there that you can click as well. But spacebar, good shortcut to quickly capture it and then type in the name of your trace, and always name your traces. That way, when we bring them up later on, you can easily identify which trace you want to bring into the measurement pane.
Excellent points, Rob. Thank you for all of that. While Rob was talking, I pulled up a little sticky note to keep some notes on our broadband energy level. And you'll see that I also went over here to the RMS averaging, and I changed it to slow to keep this number in the center here a little bit more stable. It makes my life a little bit easier. And I'm going to type in the value that I have there is 103.5. Don't worry too much about that actual number. It's all just a relative difference that we're looking at. Okay, Matt, tell me what's up next.
All right, so now that we've captured that measurement and we've noted the broadband energy level of that position, we're going to go ahead and move the microphone to the first listening position.
Hey, the mic's right here.
The mic's right here, so you can see as I talk into the microphone, it gets louder. So I'm going to go ahead and move this to the first position, and Steve's going to play the signal from the subwoofer again. And we know that the trace will be much lower in output because we're further away from the subwoofer, and that's okay. We'll address that once we've completed taking all of the measurements throughout the room. So this first position is going to be the left side of this main speaker here. So I'm going to come over here to position, and I'm going to set the microphone about maybe 6 to 8 inches off the ground. similar to what the subwoofer would be in height.
Right on. So I'm going to go ahead. It's hard to see in the room view there. It's right behind the cart, but it's just to the left of the left speaker. And it's the microphone stand is bent over and the microphone is just kind of pointing off the wall a little bit. So I'll go ahead and hit play on our SIGGEN. And see here, first thing you'll notice that the response is different, and we expected that. We'll also notice that it's lower in level. And while I'm going through this, maybe some people could guess as to why that level is lower. So I'm going to go ahead and capture this and put left of left speaker. Right.
I had to turn down my office subwoofer while you guys are playing that pink noise. My floor was rumbling.
Speaker, and our broadband energy level in this case is 91.8, right? So did we get any answers as to why it was so much lower?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
All right, we're going to go off to position 2 now.
All right, so just for sanity, I'm going to leave the music playing. Music.
Okay.
So Matt's got the mic stand. He's going to move it over, and we're going to put it to the inside of right speaker. Capitalization doesn't matter, right? All right, and now we see the red curve is the captured one, and the tan color is the current one. So come down here. I'll hit this and inside of right speaker, right?
That's right.
And we're going to look at our BEL, or broadband energy level, and we're going to find that is going to be 89.9, right?
That's good.
Okay.
All right, now moving to position 3, which is going to be the very corner.
All right. Move it over there. Wait for that to stabilize a little bit. Capture that.
And maybe while we're doing this, if anybody can make any guesses in the chat of which position is going to end up being the best. I'd like to see
Greater distance between the microphone and the subwoofers. The
Aaron
answer
for the
that came
win.
in.
Absolutely. So we're further away from where that original measurement was taken. So as you get further away, the level of sound will drop. So obviously we're going to normalize those levels to make sense of those compared to the reference. And it's the deviations that are really going to matter. So excellent answer, Aaron. Thank you for it. So we have our right corner now, and we have our BEL. So let's go ahead and the last two locations, we're going to move away from the front, and we're going to go back over towards where the seating location is. And the first thing you're going to do is under the table, right?
under the front seat here.
Right. Under the main seat, right?
Under the main seat. Yeah.
So this is literally, we're putting it directly underneath the listener's butt, which is an interesting location, but we're just trying to have some fun here and give you guys some ideas. If you have a sofa with a thin subwoofer, maybe this would be a viable location. So we're just trying to simulate different locations.
Right, and this is a desirable spouse location because they don't have to see it.
All right, so under main seat, and we'll get our BEL. Hey, it's louder than the other ones. Why is that? Aaron already knows, no need to answer. It's closer to where the microphone is.
All right, and the last
Oh, the sub is in this case. And the last position, we're going to move it back a little bit. We're going to put under the table behind the seat. Okay, and we're going to capture that in just a moment.
And in a home, you may have a small table or something behind a couch.
Right.
And sometimes that's a possible location as well. So
Now let's look at our BEL. And logically, as Aaron noted, it's going to be higher in level than some of the other ones, but not as high as directly underneath the sub. Okay,
So
I'm going to kill that sub now.
Perfect.
There we go.
And let's go ahead and make this RTA full pane here.
Got it. You want to drive or you?
So I think it's worth noting at this point that our variation between the different positions in the room is not huge, but it is a bit large on some of the traces. The inside of the right speaker is down to 89.9 and under the main seat is 96.5. So that's a 6 dB difference in level. That's a big deal. So depending on which subwoofer you're using when you're setting your room up, if you're using a Gotham, your Gotham will be able to overcome a level difference. You don't need to put the Gotham under your seat. But if you're using a smaller woofer like a D108 or D110, maybe consider what the options in the room are as far as level, and know that the subwoofer is going to have to overcome any lower level positions. So we should consider that as we're making this decision.
That's a really good point. To summarize that a little bit, if you have a gigantic room, the little D110 is not going to fill that room. And this room is a bit challenged. So just know that these are relative differences, and you should know the capability of your subwoofer, at least within reason. Don't worry about the numbers too much. Just expect that a single 8 or a single 10 is not going to do what dual 12s or dual 13s are going to do.
Right. So in that case, find a better position
Right.
of level sometimes.
Exactly. All right, so what's bothering me about this right now is everything is off here on the left, and I got this big black void over here on the right. So I'm going to change the position of all this by scaling it, right?
Okay. How do we scale it, Steve?
There's a couple of ways. Up here in the upper right-hand corner, if I hover, you can see that I can zoom in using a mouse. There's also, if I right-click, I can set up a graph scale. So I'm going to kind of show both. I'm going to zoom in using my cursor here, and I can kind of spread this out. So wherever I start and wherever I stop, it's going to snap to that. So that's not bad. But if I wanted it better, I could right-click and set up a scale. And in this case, I can set it up as to, let's do all. So I'll do it from 20 hertz to
200.
200 makes sense, right?
Yes.
And then the scale here, I could put anything. I like round numbers. I don't like when there's all weird decimals and stuff like that. The actual position of this isn't bad. So I might do 60 there and maybe 100 there. Yeah, that looks pretty good.
Looks good to me.
So now we have our scale set up, and I have my little sticky note for reference. I'm going to try to keep this out of the way as much as I can.
So what we need to do at this point is we need to subtract the numbers of the positions from the reference so we can find out the offset value that we need to enter into tune so we can overlay all the traces as close as possible.
All right, that was a lot there.
Yes,
so,
go ahead and unpack that.
So what Matt is referring to is if you, in the upper right-hand corner, there's a combo box is what it's called. It's this downward arrow. And you can pull this up, and you can see here all the captures that we have made, these little colored rectangles on the bottom. And we have the ability to hide and show each one of those measurements in turn, right? Up here is our actual measurement, the one with the green arrow on it. That's the live data that we were looking at before. And you can kind of see right now I have a 60 hertz hum in this room, which is not that uncommon in this building. But I can hide that and make it go away if I want to. You'll also see that there's a number value, and that was done to offset the trace itself to position it on the screen at a more normal level. So what we're going to do is we're going to put values in for each of these traces as well. And you can see as I change these values to negative or positive numbers, I can move the trace, and the data remains the same. It's just the position on the screen that's going to change. So guide me through, Matt. What do I got to do here?
Well, first we have to do the math on our little sticky note.
Don't
here.
ask me to do math live.
All right. I'll do the math live, and I'll tell you how much value to enter.
Okay, I'm
So
on the reference.
The reference is going to stay at 0.
I can do that math by myself.
Sure. Now we're going to bring up all the other traces to match the reference.
So I could actually just take this and just hit the up arrow, right?
You could, but
it's not very scientific.
No, the math works a little bit better in this aspect. So the first one we should set to, I believe it's going to be 11 point. Bear with me. It's been a little while since I've done math in my head. It's going to be 11.3, I believe.
And there's these things called calculators. They're on your phone, on the computer.
Well, we have a producer that can help us with this.
Yeah.
Bust out the abacus.
I think I'm trying to confirm that I did that correctly. Bear with me 1 second. He's got a phone. Pull out your phone.
So you keep working and see what you can enter in. I'll get these numbers. How do you use a phone?
All right. So this one's going to be 13.6.
Okay. So I got 103.5.
Minus 91.8.
91.8. 11.7. That's why I
knew I was
way
wrong.
off.
By a tiny bit. All right. So then right corners should be 10.3.
Right corner, 92.2. 10.3.
Wow,
That's getting
got
good.
that
Look at
one.
this. 103.5. FM.
7.
96.5. See, now he's in the rhythm. You got it right.
All right. And the last one is going to be 10. We don't need math for that.
All right. There we go. So now everything's been normalized. And we can kind of see the overlays. And now it's almost like what? Process of elimination, right?
That's right. I'm going to get rid of this this trace because what's happening is my cursor is hovering over the active trace. All right. So now we should look at the reference.
So the reference is the gray one.
That's the gray. So we want to eliminate anything that has big, nasty peaks in the response or dips,
So
nulls.
I'm looking at yellow as a
Yeah,
pretty
for
bad
sure,
offender.
yellow.
pretty nasty null right around 75.
All right, he's
So
gone.
kill him. Now I'm looking at that red trace. Red trace has got a drop off, but that's over 100 hertz. So I'm not sure if I'm worried about that.
It's also got a null down in the 35 hertz.
and a little bit of a null down around 60.
So I'll get rid of red as well.
Kill red, it's gone. So now I'm looking at, the next one with the biggest offending dips would be the orange one.
All right, orange is out.
Okay. Ooh, these are close.
Yes.
So obviously the gray ones are reference. We're not eliminating that. That's the reference. So between blue and green, they're really similar. So in those cases, I'm going to go for the one that's got better low end, which would be green.
Yep.
I think I'd agree with that.
Okay. So, well, look at that. So what we've just done is we've looked at the measured room response for all those different locations, found the ones with the worst offending dips in areas that mattered most, and we got rid of them. And what we're left with is a location that, if it's suitable for our room, like cosmetically and everything else, would give us the best overall performance with the least deviation away from our reference curve. So, I mean, if we could do this, it would be great. And where is that one? That is under the main seat. Now you know why we picked it.
Well, what's interesting about that is not only was it the smoothest response, but it also has the most output level.
Mm-hmm.
That's a double win.
It's a double win for sure.
That's great.
Cool. So we have our location. What's our next step?
All right. So now I'm going to go reconfigure some of the wires to go through our Cr1 processor. Maybe if you can explain the signal chain of electronics that we have and how we're going to set this up. I'll move the subwoofer into position. I'll set up the mic and reconfigure the wires.
Fantastic. So basically what we're doing, the signal is routed out of our computer via RCAs. It's going to go into the CR1, right, first? Yes.
Into the Cr1.
Goes into the Cr1. From the Cr1, it's going to split out. 2 channels are going to go to the main amplifier that's going to power our main speakers, and the other channel is going to go out to our subwoofer. And if you're not familiar with the Cr1 is, it's an active electronic crossover, which has a high pass and low pass that we can stagger or link and keep them tracking. It also has some other functionality that makes it really, really cool. Today's session is not about selling you a Cr1, but if you do have the opportunity to work with this piece, not only is it great for room setup, but it's really great for demonstration purposes as well. I know it sounds ironic, Rob. You and I have talked about this, that the mute capability or bypass capability is some of my favorite things about this, to show how much a subwoofer can augment a really good quality pair of main speakers. And this room,
and not just a subwoofer, but properly integrated in. It's one thing to add a subwoofer, but getting that perfect summation where you're not dealing with phase related cancellations is the big key. And all of the features on the Cr1 help get that integration dialed in.
Yeah, it's really good. And again, it does have some other controls that we may or may not take advantage of in our presentation today. But it is a cool piece, and it allows for quite a bit of flexibility, especially in what we're doing here. How are we looking, Matt?
We're almost there.
Any questions come up in the chat, Rod, that maybe we can cover?
Matthew brought up that the Cr1 is a brilliant bit of a kit.
I have a feeling that Matthew is not from the U.S.
United Kingdom.
There we go. All right, Matthew, I agree. It is a great piece of kit, and if you do have an opportunity to work with one, I do recommend it. It's really cool. It's a really.
He did have a question earlier while we wait for Matt to set up. When we were talking about the DARO, do you want to run that before or after you run another automated room response system on your other equipment?
So in general, I would do that separate. Obviously separate. We've been doing it after we do other room correction.
So what we're doing with DRO in this application with the Cr1, if this subwoofer had DARO, we would capture a measurement without DARO, and then once we get there, then we would run DARO and then confirm that what happened was a good change, and we removed all the peaks that we want out of the room, and then we'd move forward with that.
So if you're dealing with other room correction software, what we have found in general, and I want to be nice here, in general, they do a really poor job of compensating for an additional subwoofer. Mm-hmm. What they're measuring against is anticipating something that may not have quite the capability of proper subwoofer being integrated into the room. So when you run those processors, if you had done it with even without a DARO, it's going to castrate the sub in many cases. So we get worried about that. So I would typically do the room correction on the subwoofer after you've tried to do any of that, and bypass whatever you can if you find that it's really lacking in terms of output. Mm-hmm. Good.
That's good to me.
So where are we at now?
So at this point, we have just a little backstory. When we took all those measurements, the subwoofers, crossovers were set to off. The phase was at 0. The polarity was also at 0. So none of those things were turned on or engaged during those measurements. They are still off on the subwoofer. And all of the settings on the Cr1 are now set so we can look at the full range response. So the crossover settings are set as low as possible for the main speakers and as high as possible for the subwoofer, so we can see the raw data. And then we're going to see how they integrate, and we'll find a proper crossover frequency to integrate them, and then go look at phase. So at this point coming up, it might become a little loud in some aspects, so we'll likely mute our microphone at those points, and Rob will fill in while we're muted. So
what are you going to do first?
So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go back to the default screen. We can hide those traces for now.
Here. So I don't have to clear them. I can just hide them, right?
Correct. Just hide them.
So now we have I'm going to move my little sticky note out of the way.
Yeah, we can get rid of the sticky note now. We're done with that. So now we're going to go ahead and play some signal. Nothing will play yet because everything's muted.
Look at that. You're right.
I muted it. That's right. So now first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to unmute the main speakers just for a second and have you capture the response of those.
Okay, Rob, get ready to kill this mic.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead and kill it now. I'll be right back.
Okay. So I'll switch over to the large view. We can see Matt over there. He's unmuting the system, and we should see here in tune in just a moment the live RTA response once Steve brings that back to the front of the RTA pane. And here we have a measurement that's being captured, and he'll probably name that speakers, mains RTA or something along those lines. And you guys are back.
All right, cool. So what we did was we captured the mains, and then I unmuted the subwoofer, which the low frequency energy from the sub doesn't seem to interfere with our microphone, so that's why we can play that. All right, so far we're looking pretty good. What are we seeing here, Steve? We're seeing they overlap well.
They do overlap, but obviously we didn't play them well together. But I am noticing that there's a pretty bad null on the main speakers. Right around, what is that, 65, 70 hertz or so?
Right, and then it looks like there's another one up above that as well.
Yeah, this one up here at about 100. So that would be it's 105 or so. You could see that up in the information panel, up in this area here where my cursor is. If we put it back down there, you can see that value.
And just to be clear, these speakers are very capable speakers. They're not a bad speaker at all. It's totally the room that's causing these bad nulls. And as you can see in the room, there's nothing we can do about it. Even if we added sound treatment in the room, it's not going to help because the room is so large.
Yeah, this is ridiculous. And I think Doug was mentioning that a room like this, the modal behavior is going to be very different than a typical room that you might have. What you may or may not be able to see from our room view camera is that this is a long, skinny rectangle the opposite way that it would normally be. So it's actually wider than it is deep. So it does do some odd things, but either way, you'd still see similar behavior where you'll be able to pull out any one of those values from the response and do the same process of elimination.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So what can we do about that blue curve to make it a little bit better?
Well, in this application, nothing. We can't make it better. All we can do is try and align our high pass filter so that the nulls are somewhat out of band, and we can hopefully use the subwoofer to fix those nulls, and that way we don't have the mains struggling in that area.
Right. So we want them to play well together. And right now the main speakers with that suck out down around 65, 70 hertz or whatever it is, and again just above 100 hertz, may work against our subwoofer for making that coupling. So what we're going to use is the high pass filter frequency on the Cr1 to set that to a position to try to get rid of some of that energy outside of band of these main speakers. And hopefully our subwoofer will couple well together with it and give us a nice smooth response.
Yep.
So
I think I'm going to start maybe somewhere around 70 hertz or so. We can see that right in this region it starts to drop off. So maybe if our filter's there, we can get rid of that first null.
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and go unmute these speakers again. So Rob will have to mute us, but Steve, just give me a thumbs up whenever the crossover looks like it's at a good point that we can.
You got it. Sure.
Cool.
We're muted, right?
No.
You might want to do that. I'm going to hit play.
Okay.
Right?
All right, so now that they're muted, what we should be able to see here is when the RTA comes back on, as Matt's adjusting the high pass filter on the Cr1, we should actually see the filter frequency start to change and shift, which we're seeing now. As he's increasing the filter, you can see that null's getting lower because of the roll off. So now we have a higher frequency set for the main speakers, and hopefully that'll take out that null when we do the summation in just a little bit. And we can see here the RTA is still moving, and Steve's going to capture that because we always want to capture all of our data so we can go back and compare. And I still see Matt. Looks like he's still on the floor down there. What a lazy guy laying on the job. These new guys, when you bring them aboard. But this is really neat, like being able to actually see measurement-wise what the Cr1 is doing to our mains up in the front there. And I see Matt's back, so I'm going to assume we're good on the pink noise. And nothing. Perfect.
So I'm going to go back in.
Are we unmuted again?
You're muted or unmuted, yes.
Cool. Okay. So on the main with HPF, I wasn't sure what the filter frequency was. So
that was high, as high as the filter frequency would allow me to go. So that was somewhere around 200.
Okay, so the high pass filter on the mains.
Oh, I'm sorry. Right. The mains before was all the way down low.
Right. So now it's at what, 70?
Now it's at 70. Yes.
All right. So I just renamed it. Oops. So we'll capture that. So now we have our traces now, the ones that are visible. So I'm going to hide that one, right? And I'm going to hide that one. These are the traces we're working with. Both of these are crossed over at 70 hertz, high pass on the mains and low pass on the sub. So they look different now. So if I pull up the original one, the sub and the mains from before, you can see that the purple one is now the brown one, and the gray one used to be the blue one, right? That's right. What we needed, right? So now we're going to play them together.
That's right. We're going to play them together, and what's going to happen here is we're going to try and align the phase response of these woofers. And how we're going to do that is we're going to flip the polarity on the subwoofer, and I'm going to turn the phase knob until we create the largest null around the crossover frequency.
Okay.
So we're going to look right around 70 hertz and try and find the biggest null. And then when we get there, we're going to then flip the polarity back into the normal polarity, and we should see good summation.
Gotcha. So we are basically looking at, let me just make sure I'm getting this right. All right, so we're going to look at 70 hertz. So just to make life a little bit easier, I'm going to set a cursor at around 70 hertz, right? To give them a visual of what to look
That's
at,
fine.
right?
Yeah. So I'm going to have to unmute both speakers again. So Rob, if you would.
Will do.
So we're looking for the biggest null, correct?
Yes.
Do you want me to pause the SIGGEN? Or?
All right, so as they get set up there, again, we'll take a look at everything. And what's really neat, by flipping the polarity and adjusting the phase response, that really allows us to see where that big null is, as Matt said. And when we flip polarity back, that then null will go away. And that's kind of how we can see where really the best summation and the most energy is going to be. And as we watch on the measurement here, you can see the full range RTA, which looks like it might be brown, going across the screen right now. And we can see the changes as Matt's adjusting the levels and the frequency of the filters until we get that proper summation around that 70 hertz mark where the filters are currently set on the Cr1. And then if you haven't seen Tune 4 in action before, this is the stuff that gets me excited. Just watching a live RTA as we're making these changes to really get measurements we weren't taking before. So this is a really neat way to make sure we're not guessing, we're not in the dark. And as we unmute Steve and Matt here can tell us what exactly he did there.
That's perfect.
All right, so we're back in.
You hear us?
I hear you guys.
Okay. So I'm making it work a little bit. We went back and forth. The null was actually more pronounced above it, and what we found was the point where at around the filter frequency it was at its most dramatic point. And then I noticed that if you changed it a little bit more, it made an even more dramatic point slightly above the filter frequency. So that's why I had him stop.
Which trace was it?
Pink one. The pink one is the sum
so
trace.
it's
Right?
down at the bottom here.
Yep.
So this guy here.
Yep.
Okay, so this is our null right there.
Yeah. Well, it's our deepest null, but at 70,
Got
but it's really close to.
Okay.
Anyway,
So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to play it one more time, and I'll flip the polarity back, and what we should see is good summation.
That's the goal.
All right, here we go.
Well, we'll mute them one more time. Now that they're muted, Matt can unmute the audio system in the room. And when he flips the polarity, we should see that, oh yeah, look at that. Right around 70 hertz, if you look at that pink trace, you can see a massive increase in energy at that summation point to really make sure we have our proper frequencies dialed in on our filters. And you guys are unmuted again.
Excellent. I named it wrong, but I can fix that. I put sub without null, but I'm going to put.
But man, look at that big increase on that yellow captured trace compared to the initial pink trace. That's a pretty substantial difference. I'm sure Steve can do like a cursor B and set that so we can see the difference in output.
Yeah,
between
we
the
can
two.
absolutely do that. So if we set 2 cursors right around the null, one there.
This is a cool trick to compare 2 measurement points. If you want to compare the difference in frequency or amplitude, or with max, the difference in the phase response, how many degrees they're away from one another.
You see that number, Rob?
Let me make it large so my bad eyes can see. That looks like a 10.5 dB difference.
10.5 dB difference. And I think what's important here is, obviously, with the polarity reversed, it was easy to see the null, and that's why we chose to do that.
Right.
Trying to see that increase, while it may be visible, it's not as visible as that null, which is why we do what we call the polarity trick. We flip it out to force it to be canceling, and then we unflip it to get it to sum more properly together. So that yellow trace there is the summation of the main speakers and the subwoofer at the 70 hertz high pass and low pass filter frequency. And it does a really nice job. And overall, I mean, it looks a little jagged because of the type of average banding that we have on this right now, but that's actually pretty good. I know my eye, just for the record here, my eye is drawn to that notch right around 200 hertz or whatever. That's actually by design. That's not a flaw. That actually tends to be very pleasing to listen to, and I can confirm that it is with these speakers. I think you'd agree.
Absolutely.
So what's next, Matt?
So what I'm looking at here in this response is it looks pretty good. Right down here around 105 to 120 hertz, there is a bit of a null compared to the rest of the trace. So if we were to overlay like a target on this, just to see like how what we normally set a target to, and you guys might not be familiar with targets, we'll give you a little bit about that. But if you're not familiar with seeing them, you may not catch this null. But I'm going to go ahead and pull one up. Maybe Steve can elaborate a little more on targets.
So to kind of clean up the measurement as well, can we remove some of the individual traces so we can focus on that?
Pretty.
I will make that pretty.
So what we do with target curves is these are simulated responses that behave just like a normal speaker system would. So we can create a target that has a subwoofer response and a mains response, and then show how those will function if they were played together. This will show relationships both in frequency, level, and in time as well. So we get to see the phase interaction sort of like in real time with the simulation. And if we take that and overlay it with the actual measured data, like we have right now, we can kind of see what they should be like if it was a perfect world, right? Is that a good way of looking at it?
You said perfect? Hold on, I'll make it perfect. How's that?
Okay. Just keep throwing some banding at it. Right? But truth be told, to get some of that visibility, you can play with the settings and tune software to try to make it a little bit easier to see. Sometimes you get tricked, your eye gets tricked into thinking things are jagged because of the way the response is showing up. But overall, the averaging of this, the way our brain perceives sound, is a lot closer to the smoother line than you might think. So if we notice what Matt was saying before, that if you look at the target curve, the target would be the purple one is the subwoofer, the red one is the main speakers, and the thinner of the 2 yellow lines, horrible color choice.
Hold on, it's the hiding yellow line. It's this one here. I'll change the other trace so that we can. Oops, that's not the right one.
So if you notice the way they sum together to that thin line, it's a nice smooth transition between the two. But if you actually look at our measured response, it's a little different than that. What'd you do? You get rid of that yellow thing there.
Yes.
Kill that. There we go. So the green trace is the summation that we actually have. The yellow trace is what the ideal target response would look like. And we could use this to our advantage. There may be some things that we could do using a Cr1 or a comparable electronic crossover to improve the interaction between these. Without being able to see phase, we can use this tool instead. Matt, you want to walk us through how that works?
Sure. All right, so what we're going to do here, we know that we had some nulls in the lower frequency range of the main speakers.
Right
So
around that was around 70 hertz and around 100 hertz, right?
Right, 60 something.
60 something.
So we don't want to lower those speakers anymore.
No,
but
you don't want to get into
the
that.
sub will play higher, and it won't cry about it. It'll do a really nice job playing higher, and we can see
And
that.
that's where our issue is.
Right, we could see that based if we look at our original sub trace, right? So I think that was that one there. We could see that this purple trace will play well over the target range, and it'll hide all of the issues in the 70 hertz range. So
let me make sure I get this right. So looking at this purple trace, the darker purple, and again, I'm interested in colors right now, it's showing that the sub can actually play some of the energy that our current sub trace is missing.
yes, it can.
So we can try to take advantage of that by maybe raising the low pass filter frequency to get some of that energy back.
We can try. So what I'm going to do first here is we're going to bring up our original main speakers with the high pass filter, which is our gray trace. And what we're going to do is we're going to move our target frequencies so that they match the gray trace.
So what you're saying is we're going to modify the target.
That's right.
Got it. Okay, to kind of better match what our actual speaker is doing.
Right. We can't change that speaker any more than we have. So we're going to make our target match. So I'm going to engage what's called high pass, low pass tracking here. And what that allows us to do is choose multiple crossover points and move those in real time. And you can see that the sum, the yellow trace, stays the same while we move the individual passband targets.
So what this allows us to do is, again, try to see through the jagged response a little bit. And we have the red trace now matching very closely to what that whitish grayish trace is actually doing. So our target is starting to model the actual speakers that we're working on, which is ultimately what we're trying to do here. Right. So with that in place, we can do the same with the sub, right?
Right. So let's take a look at what the sub was, right? So the sub with the 70 hertz low pass filter. And you notice that if we leave the sub at 70 and we match the crossover point of the mains, we're actually missing some of the energy that needs to be here.
So what you're looking at there, Matt, is the difference between the purple, which is the target, and the weird brownish mustard color of the actual measured data.
Correct.
So that is very close to the region that we actually had that null.
That's right.
So if we raise the crossover point of the actual measured sub, right, we don't have to change the target anymore because that's summing correctly. If we raise the measured response low pass frequency, we could try to get that to more closely line up with the sub target now.
That's right. And hopefully have better summation because of that.
And logically it should, because we see that the red and the purple sum to the yellow. So what we want to do is get the white and this brownish color to sum to something very close to what the yellow is.
Correct.
Let's try it.
All right. So I'm going to unmute the sub. Rob, we can stay live for this one. It won't be loud.
Okay. And I
got my subwoofer turned down here.
So what Steve's going to do is he's going to just tell me when to stop, when our trace is overlaying. I'm just going to turn the subwoofer low pass up until it overlays the purple.
Perfect.
So,
and he's off. All right, sub is on. Okay.
Here we go.
Keep going, keep going, keep going. Slow down, slow down. A little bit more. A little bit more.
It's so cool being able to watch
Stop there.
Frequency change and just line it right up with that target.
Stop. Tighten a little bit more if you can. Perfect.
Right there?
Got it.
Okay.
Some with LPF. What was our frequency there?
Let me go back and check. Sorry about that. It is. I don't want to say it out loud. People might think we're crazy. It's 110 hertz.
I just put higher. Okay.
No, it's 110 hertz.
All right. So what we did there, let me just clean up our screen a little bit for a second here. It's all hidden already. So I'm going to hide all of this stuff real quick. So
we wanted to look at system without null, which is green, right?
Without null.
Okay. Yep. So that's our last trace.
And
that's good. We're good there.
And there's the sub with the higher low pass filter.
Low pass filter, right.
Right. So now if we pull up our targets again, the mains and the subwoofer.
Ooh.
We want the
you want the gray main, so that would be this one, the main with 70.
Okay, I'm going to hide that green one.
Okay.
Right.
So now what we should see is
what I did real quick. What I did with Matt was I made sure that this trace was as close to the purple as possible, right? And you can see that they're overlaid pretty well. Every time we talk, this kept changing. Right. So that's why I was telling everyone to be quiet.
Sorry, I get
Now what we need
excited.
to do, since our measured responses are very closely lined up with our target responses, if we play them both together, the sum response should be very close to what the sum response of the target should be.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And then we'll pull up the system.
Yep,
without
and we'll
the number,
compare it.
right.
So, Rob, go ahead and mute us for a second.
All righty. Let's see here. You guys are now muted, and I'll be quiet.
All right. So, see how it looks when he captures it.
All right. So now, you got us back?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you see that it actually is fairly close to the yellow. Yeah, go ahead. You drive it.
And so we're going to unmute the green one, and then I'm going to hide the current trace, and I'm going to hide the gray, which is this one. I'm going to hide the white. So that's our difference right there. So they're both the same color. Let me change the color again.
Every time how luck works. There we
All right.
go.
So what we're looking at now is the difference between red and green. And we could see that we filled in a lot of that area around the 70, 80, 90 hertz region.
So we have a saying when we do these types of measurements, let the data be your guide.
Mhm.
So the normal logic would be that you pick a filter frequency, high pass and low pass, so that they match, so that they play well together. But what we just demonstrated is sometimes you can look beyond that and see how they're truly playing well together. If you can't see the actual phase response and seeing how nice they are playing in time, by looking at that summation and knowing that the target is playing nice in time, you could sort of get a glimpse into what would happen is if you change some of those filter frequencies and did something slightly less conventional. You can see here that we gained a pretty significant amount of output. We can find out what that is by using the cursor controls. And the way these work is you put a cursor at one position on one of the traces and you capture it. Then you change and set up another cursor on the other position and you look at it. And in your information panel, you'll see the change between those two different cursor positions. And it looks like we have a difference of just about 7 dB of additional output at that point.
At the maximum.
At the maximum position, we gained about 7 dB, which is a massive amount of energy gain for a very minimal amount of effort put into it. I mean, this whole training from soup to nuts was less than an hour. So in less than an hour, in less than 5 minutes, we found 7 dB. That's a pretty good deal, I think.
Absolutely. And it's closer to our target. It's a little bit more bass than our target.
Perfect.
Right. We can always adjust the level of the subwoofer
Right.
down a little bit if it's too hot. At this point, we would spend some time listening to it. Right?
Oh, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
we would definitely make changes based on level. The phase knob and polarity would remain the same. We objectively determined that they are right, and changing them is only going to result in less output than we have now. So if we're going to adjust
The key word that Matt used that I want to talk about is the word objective.
Yep.
It wasn't just somebody crawling around a room saying, I think this sounds better. It's someone that actually took a measurement that if we did the same thing and put the microphones in roughly the same location, we would get the same results every time. Objective analysis is scientifically repeatable. And this is what we want, a faster way to get accurate, useful measurements so that we can make really good choices based on true data instead of just, I think this sounds better. Maybe this is good. It's objective. The subjective analysis comes next when we listen to it and say, you know what? I'd like to change a little bit here, a little bit there. Usually this would be done with an EQ, but you can change whatever controls you have access to. But note this, what Matt just shared, don't change the phase or polarity. Leave those in place. Making changes there would kind of screw up that relationship. And that's one thing we don't want to do. It's salt and pepper. It's seasoning to taste, right?
And we also have some other controls on the Cr1. So we have damping controls around the crossover frequencies.
Damping, not dampening, right?
Damping. So we can adjust.
Dampening is what happens if you throw it in the pool.
Yeah. We can adjust the booster cut around the crossover frequency for both the satellites and the subwoofer. And we can also adjust the subwoofer satellite balance on the Cr1. So if we want a little more bass and a little less speaker or vice versa, we can tilt that balance back and forth until we find right where we want it. And it's a lot easier to do when you have a helper sit there while Steve sits in his couch and
right.
and tells me what to do, you know. But
while we wait for Rob to call any questions that we may have, I'll tell you that when we were playing around with this yesterday, we had a couple of locations that we were trying, and the location under the table measured really well. And you probably noticed that today that it measures really well as well. And Matt said, I bet that sub will fit under the chair and get even better. Why not try it? So we tried it, and when we got the better results, especially at the lower frequency, I said we should use it there and see what it sounds like. And when we did this listening test, it does sound really, really good. And in a certain situation, it sounds like all the bass is in front of you, but there's a clue that it's not. And it's a really interesting thing. When it was under the table, we didn't have this clue. It sounded really good. It was amazing how the bass sounded like it was coming from the front of the whole listening area. There was no localization. And just for the heck of it, we started playing with some of the phase controls to see if we could localize that sub. And it took a lot before we could get it really to be localized. Then we went for the moon. We went all the way, and we put the sub under the seat. And we could localize it, but not audibly. The pressure was moving your pant leg. So you would feel the pressure on your legs, and that's how you knew that it was underneath you. If you spread your legs out, you couldn't tell anymore.
So one thing I did differently today, Steve didn't notice apparently, I flipped the sub backwards. So the sub's now pointing the other way.
Look at that. I can't see it from this angle.
So now we wouldn't be able to,
you wouldn't be able to tell.
We wouldn't be able to localize it audibly or through our pant legs. So
earlier when we were talking about the smoothest response is usually the best. This is some of the things that we were thinking about, that if in that location, it gets good measured results, but there's some way that we could localize the subwoofer, a vibration or something else that causes our attention to be paid to where the sub is, we might want to consider one of the alternate locations instead to get rid of that localization clue. Or if, hey, this is a great location underneath the seat, but I can't really put it there. So then we go to that secondary location. And these are all considerations when you're speccing out a room and you're doing these measurements. Obviously, you're not going to measure a location that you could never put the subwoofer. That would just be wasteful. So these are all locations that are at least in the realm of possibility. So now we know how to go through each one of these measurements, determine which one's going to be our best choice, and then integrate that into our main speakers, even without being able to see phase, but being able to see the proper summation. We learned a little bit about using target curves, and that's a deeper topic, of course, but at least you have some idea what those can do for you. So, Rob, what do we got? We got some questions?
No real questions. Nice comment from David Singh up in Canada about the Cr1. Really how it's an ear opener, not an eye opener. When you hear, even though if a nice pair of speakers can say they play down to 25 hertz, it's not going to do it the way a subwoofer can.
Right.
And by using that bypass function, you can hear the difference. Take out those lower frequencies from the mains, let them breathe, let them shine where they're really designed to shine, and let the subwoofer handle that heavy lifting in the low frequencies. And the Cr1's that bypass function, it's night and day. You hear the difference. And I love how Dave said it's an ear opener, because it really is. Once you hear it, it's hard to get away from it.
So just for clarity, the way that bypass button actually works is it truly bypasses everything. It gets rid of the subwoofer entirely and gets rid of the high pass filter entirely. So you go from listening to the mains full range unfiltered to the mains properly filtered with the subwoofer properly integrated. And the difference sometimes can be rather dramatic. I remember doing demonstrations for companies that make full range product that we integrated a subwoofer with, and we would play the system and they're like, wow, that sounds really good. Is that just our speakers? They're like, no, this is your speakers. And we did the bypass and they're like, ooh, yeah, put that back. When it's done well, which is a trick, when it's done well, it can be really rather dramatic. So I think what Matt has walked us through today, and thank you for it, Matt, is a really good way of using a free piece of software and a fairly inexpensive microphone and just a little bit of time moving some things around and making some captures. I think it's a great way of doing that integration. Yeah, of course, the Cr1 helps, but if you have other tools that allows for the same type of control, obviously you could use those as well.
Yeah, just want to briefly touch on those other tools real quick.
Yep, go.
They would be slightly different than using a Cr1. Most people may have a AVR, a receiver that allows you to add distance to determine how far away a speaker is or a subwoofer, and those would work differently than what we did today. We're not going to get too deep into it. If there's any questions about that, we'll be happy to answer them, but they would be a different behavior. When you change the distance, it's going to change where the subwoofer and the speakers align in the room. So it's a bit of a different training, I think.
Yeah, if there was a measurement system for that we could find that information on.
So what Rob is alluding to, of course, is our max measurement system that does allow us to see a lot of these interactions with a lot more clarity, which allows us to move even faster and with higher degree of accuracy. So the max system can allow for that. But one important thing is if you don't have the tools to make some of the changes, having that measurement system can almost annoy you. With an AVR, like Matt was just describing for us, you can trick the system into thinking that it's doing something for you rather than what it thinks it's doing. And you do that by faking the distance on the sub. So the way it kind of works is a lot of these AVRs, you set the distance by entering in a value for how far each one of these products may be. And the subwoofer is almost always going to be one of the longest ones because it's usually put off in a corner or something like that. If you add distance to the subwoofer, in effect, you're adding delay to the mains to kind of line up the sub and the mains. And it's a little heady to think about it, but that is some of the tools that we can use to adjust the phase response by adding delay. So that's kind of,
yeah. Let's see. I think we had another question in here.
Yeah,
Rob.
Jason asked if we were going to cover integration of multiple subs.
That's an awesome question, Jason. You're a man after my heart. So yes, it's a very interesting topic, and you could do the same thing. So in a nutshell for right now, and this is something we should probably consider doing.
Yeah.
What I like about that is we get to play with more subs, right? But what we could do is measure multiple locations, right? And you put the microphone in locations where subwoofers may be able to go. And you could take those traces to find those best locations. Then when you put that second sub in, obviously the levels would need to come down because you have too much energy then. And you could find that second location and measure the room again to see if the nulls and whatnot got better at those points. So basically it's the same process. As I kid around, it's lather, rinse, and repeat. Just keep doing the same thing with each subwoofer iteration, right?
So yeah, so what I would do is I would find the first subwoofer's position. I would get it in place. I would integrate it with the main speakers. Once you integrate that first subwoofer, then you take the second subwoofer, get it in its relative position, and then you would turn off the main speakers and play the first subwoofer and capture that trace. And then you would play the second subwoofer and you would effectively try to make the measurements cancel. You want the least energy possible between the two subwoofers. So you would flip the polarity, turn the phase knob until you get them to almost cancel. And then once you get it to almost cancel, flip the polarity back. And what you should see is big summation. And then as Steve alluded, you'd have to turn the volume down on both subwoofers so that they would overlay on the targets like we had up earlier. You don't want to, I mean, some people may want to turn the bass all the way up, but if you have too much bass, it will change the way the system presents, and it may sound too heavy, you know.
You want to maintain some balance between the mains.
Of course, and the subs. Yeah. I mean, I always kid around that there's never too much bass, but the reality is that there can be. So it's a delicate balance, and once you get it dialed in, again, not to pitch the Cr1 too much, but the Cr1 does allow that subsat balance, so you could actually change it in that on its own. So that's a cool additional tool. So.
Yeah. And also having two subs working half as hard makes the subwoofer's life much more reliable.
Yes.
You're going to have even less likely to ever have an issue with. And
when anything dynamic happens, like a depth charge or something like that, the sub's got more room to be able to replicate that without distortion.
Yeah.
Which is just freaking awesome.
Yeah. When you're watching movies with dual subs, you really get an experience. You do.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
Excellent.
Any other questions?
No, that was it. Jason said that was very cool.
Cool. Glad we could help, Jason. So,
all right.
Excellent. All right. Well, this was great. Next week, we're going to talk about using the max measurement system to do integration, similar to what we did today, but we're going to use multiple microphones and maybe tap into some of the more powerful tools that you can unlock using Max with Tune 4. Now, we realize that not everyone can do this, but you could see some of the advantages by watching next week. So we'll do that. Yes, cool. Jason, it will be.
Yeah, all videos, once this the live broadcast ends, all of our trainings are on our Facebook page. So if you go to the videos tab on the JL Audio Facebook, where you guys are right now, if you're watching live, you'll see all of our previous trainings and this session under videos. And then usually within a week, it gets uploaded to the JL Audio YouTube channel as well. So you have two places that you'll be able to watch it.
This will be part of the Tune and Max playlist on Facebook as well.
Yes.
So there's a whole playlist of Tune and Max videos that's awesome to check out if you've missed any of the videos, or if you want
to learn more about how to work with the traces or some of the other features in Tune 4. If you haven't joined us on our previous sessions, we got you covered.
Awesome. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, Matt, very much. Thanks, Rob, for being a fantastic producer today. And no echo.
No echo.
And,
funny. I come back and they go away. I don't know how that works.
He makes a lot of people go away when he comes.
All right. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.